Let's go to the Middle East now with new threats from President Trump to expand his war beyond Iran as he blows past his deadline that he set for a ceasefire. The president signed the so-called Memorandum of Understanding 60 days ago. Well, time is now up, and this war is not over. The president telling Fox News, quote, "I have no time schedule. I'm not in a hurry." We should note he has declared the war over multiple times. And now he threatened to rope Oman into all of this. His words, if Oman gets in the way, we're going to bomb the expletive out of them. Oman and Iran have talked about reopening the Strait of Hormuz, that waterway carrying much of the world's oil. Those talks have not included the United States, and they don't seem to be working. One agency that tracks these things reporting that ship crossings crawled to a near halt this weekend. Want to bring in Yamiche Alcindor, who's been following this for us from the White House. So time is up on this ceasefire. You've got the president, he's not in a rush, but also threatening to bomb Oman. The sense to me seems as if the president doesn't have a clear path forward here.
I think that is clearly what's going on right now. The president, as you said, saying that there's no timeline here. He was also questioned about whether or not the midterms coming up in November, whether that was weighing in on him as oil prices and other Americans are looking at this and wondering if there's going to be an end to this in sight. And the president's essentially saying there's no rush here. Now, the president was questioned specifically about his anger at Oman. Take a listen to what he had to say in the Oval Office.
Would you say you're out of patience with Oman as strategic?
No, I don't think they behave very well, but we handle them very easily, just like we do other things.
Now, when I talk to White House officials here, they tell me that the president still is interested in a diplomatic solution here. That being said, it's just not clear what the way forward is now that this deadline has passed, Yasmin.
So we mentioned the president roping in Oman into this whole thing, also roping in, it seems, North and South Korea regarding Iran, using kind of his relationship with the leader of North Korea to taunt South Korea in a way for not helping with the war in Iran. Reporters asked him about his contact with the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, today. Here's what he said.
Why hasn't Kim Jong-un responded to your request to have a conversation?
How do you know he hasn't responded?
Has he?
Yeah, he has.
Did you speak to him? Did you speak to him before you made the announcement yesterday?
Where are you in conversation?
That's very positive.
Explain this to us. Why is he doing this?
It's really interesting. I should just say that I asked the White House specifically for any more details about the president's correspondence with the leader of North Korea, and we haven't got any more details there. But essentially, the president is saying he wanted to ask South Korea to pitch in, essentially, in Iran, because he believes that as the United States is giving South Korea protection from North Korea, that they owe the United States an effort and the ability to also call on them when they want them to be involved in the Middle East. So the president said specifically that he asked the president of South Korea to send military resources to Iran, and the South Korean president declined to send those military resources to Iran. And as a result, he got mad, the president, and said that he was going to be pulling back on these military exercises that the United States does with South Korea. Experts say that that's a big deal. But the president is essentially saying, if I don't get what I want from different countries, in this case South Korea, then I'm going to also pull back U.S. resources. So this in some ways really goes to the expanding nature of the war in Iran. The president now essentially talking to other countries that have nothing to do with Iran in some cases about Iran, and getting mad about the fact that he can't have other countries involved in what is this sprawling and continuing military conflict, Yasmin.
Yamiche Alcindor, thank you. I appreciate it.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.